AIOps Evolution Weekly.
Welcome, everyone, to the AIOps Evolution Podcast Season 2. I'm your host, Sean McDermott. And this season, as I've talked about before, we're focusing on vendors and what the vendors are doing, and we're interviewing lots of different vendors in this space. And today, we have the honor of having Dynatrace on. So I wanted to welcome Russell Wilkinson to the podcast. Russell, welcome.
Thank you, Sean. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you. So, Russell, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump into it.
Russell Wilkinson, based in Memphis, Tennessee. Not a typical place you think of IT people sitting unless they're tied to one of the AutoZone or FedEx. But I've been in the industry now for much longer than I care to admit, since the early 90s, was with Novell, VMware in the very, very early days. Most recently been on board with Dynatrace here for the last 2.5 years, which has been an amazing journey going from just pure infrastructure on into the APM world, but really more around intelligent observability here the last couple of years.
Great. So you've been around the block for a long time.
I like to say I'm Network 286 old, not punch card old. So
I think
we just lost half the audience anyways.
Yeah, I think I did punch card in college, and then I did 286, like my first real computer. I actually brought up the first internet connection for the civilian government at the Department of Justice, and I ran it on a upgraded 486, right? I bought a 386, and they gave me a processor. They gave me an upgrade a couple months later, and it was literally running under my desk on SCO Unix. So I'm of that generation, yeah. And we probably just lost half the audience on that one. So, but anyways, everyone come back. We're going to talk about some really cool stuff around AIOps. So let's talk about. So I'd like to start this off with kind of your opinion on things. I know Dynatrace has been around for 16 years, I think, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So, but made a pretty significant pivot about 8 years ago. So before we get into that, give me your opinion. I mean, obviously you're working in the AIOps space. You've been doing this for 2.5 years. You come out of the infrastructure. You know how complicated this thing. You kind of got into VMware and virtualization, and then Cisco, and got to see the big machine. So tell me about like your opinion on AIOps, like how we got to where we are today, a little bit of history, and where you think we are right now in this kind of AIOps evolution.
Yeah, so there's multiple facets on that. The biggest right now is one of the ways when I first joined and we were kind of getting our little indoctrination on what we were doing around AIOps was obviously it's impacting everything we do, everything from autonomous cars to in intelligence in your video streaming platforms about predicting what shows you want to watch for good or bad, etc. In this situation, it's about turning around and taking massive amounts of data and processing it to a very specific outcome without any necessary predisposed notions of what that outcome is going to happen to be, whether that's turning around and going, hey, I need to get from here to just down the road and around the corner into some destination, and having, that data set then feed that information into the car to make the decisions to get there. Or when it comes to what we're coming out of was from APM into intelligent observability, it's about understanding a dynamic application architecture to then turn around and present back information to you that's pertinent to what you need to know, whether that's how the performance is, whether business analytics, et cetera. Some of the things we'll kind of focus in on a little bit later on.
Good. So, so what are the primary use cases that you guys are seeing right now around AIOps as you deploy Dynatrace inside of your customers?
So for us, it's about just understanding your applications, period. Especially with legacy applications, with new applications. With legacy applications, a lot of the intellectual property in organizations might have gone, and the content that you had as far as understanding, what was installed where. How do you get that back, make it fresh again? Or you're dealing with new application architectures that are coming to market that are dynamic and ever changing. And so trying to keep up with that rapidity of change, whether that's new technologies, whether that's just re-swizzling of what the architecture looks like on a given day-to-day basis based on loads and other parameters, being able to make sense of that data set. And then from that, then of course, business outcomes from that, everything from understanding it from an APM umbrella, from application performance to digital business analytics to understand how the applications are being used, and into giving data to different teams so that they can all make use of that platform.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point that we don't talk about enough, and I think kind of gets glossed over a little bit, and that's this idea of legacy applications, right? Because when you get into very large enterprises, I mean, you've got applications running on legacy hardware, mainframes, things like that they just can't get off of, right? And they can't migrate these. The cost of migrating to the cloud is just too great, and so it's good to be able to, I mean, you want to be working with all this latest technology and microservices and things like that. But there are a lot of customers out there, especially in the Fortune 500, that I assume that you guys do a lot of work with, that really are looking at these legacy applications and how to manage them in a more modern way.
Yeah, it's helping optimize those too. I mean, you look at the financial services sector and the sheer amount of IBM Big Iron that still happens to sit in there. It's fundamental to a lot of what they're doing. They're modernizing the user experience and building new application sets to engage this new kind of set of users that are coming on board. My daughter, I think I've drug her into a bank one time in her entire life, and that was to sign up for a checking account. And even she felt like that was completely plebeian and manual. And she's like, Dad, let's just go online. I'm like, no, we're going to do it old school on this one. But the point is that, those back end systems on those types of organizations and those type of industry sectors aren't going away anytime soon. But they still need to be leveraged in a new and modern way for these new application sets that are coming to market.
Absolutely. So let's shift a little bit. So where do you see AIOps going in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
For the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to continue to build these engines to bring on newer and newer capabilities in their area of focus. If you've been following Tesla, and I apologize, I completely forget what the autonomous car levels happen to be as far as fully autonomous versus it just knows when to brake because there's something in front of you. It's turning around and then building additional use cases on that. When it comes to intelligent observability, it's starting with just one set of outcomes and then figuring out how we can leverage that data or build intelligence into the data that's been gathered and discerning it for other outcomes. And what that's going to then turn around and drive is, without going full Terminator Skynet on us, it's going to be kind of that first iterations of Skynet, kind of that those self-thinking environments that as much as we talk about automation now, it's going to be turning around and having what few manual steps we're having to drive today, even turning around and removing your requirements to have those manual processes done. Like for example, today there's agents we have to put out there. If we're talking specifically around our platform, there's open source capabilities that we can ingest. There's still manual stitching together that has to be done. It's just at the very beginning of that. It's going to turn around and being able to automatically discover those and automatically go ahead and have this code start to integrate into more and more platforms.
Yeah, interesting. Good. All right. So how about we shift gears and talk about Dynatrace for a little bit?
Excellent. As I have my my Rubio moment here with my coffee.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. We all need our coffee. All right. So I have some familiar with Dynatrace. We have a number of customers that are using Dynatrace, and my consulting company has actually done work with Dynatrace. Smarter people know a lot more than I do. But so one of the things I hear a lot around with Dynatrace and what you guys talk about is this kind of deterministic AI engine. So let's talk a little bit about that. Explain to me what that is and why that matters.
So when you think about AIOps, there's really two schools of approach. There's a deterministic AI engine, and then there's a machine learning capability. And so when you look at machine learning, it's taking all these disparate data sets and trying to turn around and discern from them using an analysis engine on these disparate things being tied together. The problem there is that, one, they take time. You have to build baselines. And if you're dealing with a dynamic environment, if you're dealing with serverless functions, how can you build a baseline on a function that's only invoked once every so often? You're not getting enough of a data set to learn anything about it historically, to build that baseline off of, et cetera. Also, those data sets have to be rebuilt time and time again for the AI engine to turn around and do what it's trying to do, which is give functional information back to the customer. With a deterministic AI engine, it's working with raw data, and it's working from that. So it doesn't need somebody else turning around and building a baseline for it and then feeding it into there, and then it looks at it. It's just looking at the raw data. And we typically break that down into things like metrics, logs, traces, and a few other data sets on as well, and then analyzing that in its format. And from that, that's when we can then build, if we're looking at it from a APM perspective, that's where we can do fault tree analysis. And so that way, that's what allows us to turn around and get to root cause analysis. One, to understand not just a problem, but the full extent of the problem, including who is affected by it. But it's also turning around and giving us that root cause, not technical root cause, but foundational root cause or functional root cause, saying, okay, yes, it was a CPU spike that ultimately caused these slow service requests. But based on the analysis that we did across the entire fault tree, what we discovered was, you had some updated code in this one service. That code there specifically is what caused this cascading set of effects to ultimately impact your end users.
So interesting. So how do you guys work with third-party data, right? So a big part of root cause analysis, I'm just kind of jumping off that last point you made, right? This kind of functional root cause. So looking at root cause, you've got to understand how these different applications work together. What's the underlying infrastructure, the connectivity of the infrastructure, the microservices that are running. How do you piece all that together? Are you guys doing your own discovery, or are you working with third-party CMDBs and topology engines? How does that work?
So actually all of the above, really. So we have various ways of collecting the data sets that we happen to need. Of course, in a perfect world, we'd put the one agent everywhere, but we realize, one, there's too many touch points that we don't have control of. You have platforms as a service that you don't get access to that underlying infrastructure. There's applications as a service, vendors like ServiceNow, Salesforce, et cetera, that obviously they're not going to let us turn around an instrument, but they provide those data sets, and these data sets can come in via be extracted via API calls, or there's open source data sets. For example, like OpenTelemetry's got a vast amount of speed behind it, or velocity or momentum behind it. And in fact, we're one of the key contributors to the OpenTelemetry workforce. So that way we can pull that data in natively and stitch it into our entity model. So really, that's what you're kind of driving at, is what we call an entity model, which is the objects are going to be your infrastructure, your services, your processes, your application front ends. And, by looking at those transactions as they flow through the environment, your AI engine, in this case, what we affectionately call Davis, can dynamically build out what that relationship map looks like. And so that's how we turn around and take those data sets and stitch them back in. So using our entity model. The one offshoot of that is at that point, then it comes into the broader ecosystem around CMDB is who drives that content. And so the content of a CMDB can be driven by us, or it can be driven by a third part, by whoever owns that CMDB, whoever that solution happens to be. And then we can ingest information back from them and stitch it back to our entity model.
Gotcha. So did I hear you correctly? You call your AI engine Davis?
Yeah, Davis, and yes, she actually.
It's a she.
This predates me a bit. It's a she. Well, I mean, all the smartest people are all women. That just because my wife's in the other room, I want to make sure she hears me say that. But it's she started out as an Alexa skill. And it was kind of an offshoot project with somebody I think of Tom Hanks with Big when he went in the room and said bugs, and everybody transformed the buildings that turned into robots into bugs that turned into robots. Somebody went in a room and said, wouldn't it be nice if there was a skill that we could just ask, say, hey, what's the status of my environment today? And so Davis became that skill where people could, tie it into their Echo. And at that point, or that Alexa skill, and turn around and go in, hey, Davis, tell me what's going on this morning. And then she would turn around and say, well, you had 2 issues last night. You had 672 users impacted. There was, $17 million of revenue at risk through that issue that you happen to have. And from that became, the vernacular we use for our AI engine now.
So do you have like a hyper like turbocharged skill now, or did you kind of move away from that and just focus on your core product?
No, we kind of that to be honest, anybody could build that skill. We don't really develop that skill anymore. It still exists out in the AWS marketplace, so you could enable Davis the skill with your Alexa and get that type. But anything inside of Dynatrace is API driven, so it doesn't just have to be that. If you want to turn around and build your own app to extract the data, you can do that as well.
So you can't. So like an executive can't walk into his office right now and be like, "Hey, Davis, give me a lowdown on everything," and it'll be like some kind of like Jarvis Iron Man thing.
As it pertains, no. If he's got an Alexa and he's got the Davis skill enabled on it, it's there. We're not actively building new capabilities aside from reporting on it, but nope, it's there. In fact, we've got a few executives that spoke at Perform last year that talked about how that's the first thing they do when they walk in, which is, "Hey, Davis, tell me what happened last night."
No, that's super interesting. That's like out of a sci-fi movie, right? I mean, that's like, I don't know. I saw a movie the other day, and the guy was like, had all these screens, and he's like talking to like Jarvis, but it's like Iron Man. So, anyways, okay.
Well, I'm thinking of the latest. I was thinking of the latest Spider-Man, where he's got the Jarvis glasses now, and so if we could just get like Davis glasses, so that way you can see it all there as you're walking around. Yeah,
gotcha. All right, so. So we talked a little bit about your deterministic engine. There's a couple other things that you've brought up in the past and when we had conversations. One is intelligent observability, and the other is digital end user experience. So why don't you give us a little bit of highlight on those 2 areas?
Yeah, so when we look at intelligent observability, it's about making sure we can auto-adapt in real time. The last thing your developers, when they're building new capabilities, you're a financial services company, and think of these online-only vendors now that don't even have a brick-and-mortar front end, although the brick-and-mortar companies are doing their best to catch up to it. You want to build new functionality for your clientele. Either that's because you want to give them more functionality, or you want to draw in more clientele with new capabilities, portfolio, wealth management, things like that you weren't doing before. You don't want to have to turn around and think back, oh, wait a second, how am I going to track the performance of what I just... All you want to turn around and do is, I've got a new widget, I need to get it out into our environment as quickly as possible, let me get it out there. Intelligent observability should come along for the ride. It should be... To be honest, it shouldn't even be an afterthought. It's just a native capability that's transparent to the developers. And from that, it should then turn around, and once that new service is deployed and it starts engaging, or new users start engaging with it, or existing users, that should automatically be discovered and mapped back to the entity model. You shouldn't have to turn around and go, okay, now that we've got this new feature out there, let me go back and stitch it back into the APM tool. Because if so, then you're not going to turn around and leverage it. On the end user side, the way I like to look at it is, we've all heard that kind of phrase, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to hear it, did it really make a sound? My riff on that is, okay, if a CPU spikes in the data center but nobody's impacted by it, was it a real problem? But at the same time, there's lots of problems end users have that aren't stitched back to necessarily performance problems. So with that respect, we look at it from both sides. The speeds and feeds up and the end user down is the way I kind of refer to it this way. So while we're definitely checking out what's happening at the metrics and logs as well as the traces side in the infrastructure, it's also understanding who's using your application, how are they using the application, and are they impacted by the performance problems that are going on? So what I mean by that is, you've got a service slowdown, understanding who all was impacted by it, but also understanding their value back to you as a vendor. We use a demo app all the time called Easy Travel. So think Expedia Travelocity. And of course, I'm sure you're in the same boat I am. I'm very loyal to my loyalty vendors. So I've got my status with my airline partner. I've got my status with my rental car partner and my hotel partner. I like to be recognized as such. So with our digital business analytics, we can discern this user has the following loyalty level with you. And if they were impacted by a performance challenge, you would want to know that and be able to proactively work with them instead of waiting for them to show up on Twitter as an unhappy customer. But at the same time, it's also understanding how well the app is achieving its business outcomes. If you're SurveyMonkey, it's did you complete survey? That's their expected business outcome. If you're Travelocity, did you book travel? But if you're Ford, GM, and Chrysler and you're using the car configurator app, it's not did you buy a car from them, because as we know in North America, you can't buy a car from them directly. You have to go, unless you're Tesla, you have to go through the dealer network. So for them, it's a measure of, did you search dealer inventory? Did you get converted to be a lead for them to pass to their dealers? And so if the application isn't effectively driving that outcome, then you've got a problem with that outcome that's not even performance related. And that's something that you want to discern. So that's digital business analytics stitched with end user analysis is vitally important to understanding the efficacy of your application and how well it's helping you meet your main goal, which for a lot of us is revenue.
So are you working with app developers to instrument the apps themselves, right? Because if I'm on a mobile app, right, and this is something that's been going on for decades, right? And I remember talking to my customers back in the early 2000s, in the internet, the dawn of the internet, and trying to understand the user experience from, say, a desktop. But it could be the internet access, it could be your Wi-Fi router, it could be a lot of things that are affecting your ability. It happens to me every single day. I live in Florida. My internet, we have one provider, and I'm at the mercy of that provider, and I can't tell sometimes whether if I'm having a Zoom call, it's the other person, or it's me, or it's Zoom, right? So are you working, do you embed things into the applications themselves, so the app developers that would allow them to actually measure at the mobile app or the app that may be installed, or the browser plugins or things like that?
Absolutely. So if it's going to be a mobile app, so iOS or Android native applications, then we'll actually give you code snippets to embed in your application so that when you turn around and pull up your device and start interacting with that application, you're actually, without knowing it, sending some of your telemetry data back to Dynatrace on the backside. So when I turn around and swipe up, swipe left, how long did that swipe take? When did the images become interactable? Did you have a crash? Did the app just die? Well, that information needs to get fed back to us for analysis. If it comes to a web front end, we actually have JavaScript snippets that we put into the headers of the HTML pages that load, or the web pages that load, that run in the browser seamlessly behind the scenes. So the developers don't have to know about this. If we put our technology, what we call our one agent, on a web front end, an IIS server, an Apache web server, then this is done automatically. If you don't own that web server so that you're not allowed to put our one agent on it, then we will give you a piece of code that you just need to embed in the HTML pages. So what happens is when I bring up that, SurveyMonkey front end, this is not a quick disclaimer. I don't know if they're a customer. This is not presupposing they are, but just using them as an example on the discussion. So when I turn around and my browser loads up, goes to SurveyMonkey, that snippet comes along. Now I've got JavaScript running in the browser. It's actually reporting back, well, here's when the first byte showed up. Here's when the page became interactive so that I could start navigating with it, even if elements were still loading in the background. Here's what I did. Here's the object I clicked on. How long did that click actually take to go, and things like that. So yeah, we're actually tracking from that end user what's going on there and reporting that back so that Davis can take that into account as well as in her end-to-end data sets that she's stitching together.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because as we talk about AI ops, right? And one thing that we talk a lot about on this podcast and the weekly broadcast, we have an AIOps Evolution broadcast that we do weekly, is we talk about AI ops as an evolution. It's a strategy. It's not a platform. And one of the big conversations we're having a lot is, how does AI show up, right? And you can certainly look at a platform for monitoring that's taking in a lot of data feeds and doing correlation, but they're more passive of bringing in data, and third parties looking for them to bring in data. You guys are actually actively out there deploying technology to create even more rich data. So that's an interesting thing to be thinking about. So, all right. So let's there's one thing I want to kind of bring up to you that you and I have had conversations about. I'd love for you. I thought was interesting, and I think that the audience will find interesting. This whole idea of continuous automation, and I thought it was in the context of the client, being able to deploy continuous automation inside their environment. But I think this is continuous automation of your platform and how it delivers capabilities and new feature sets to customers and how you guys do that. So love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, and actually, Sean, if I kind of step back a little bit about what led us to that, because of our old platform, we were, so as you mentioned, Dynatrace has been around since 2005. About 10 years ago now, 8-9 years ago now, we realized that, that was that kind of machine learned traditional kind of AI tool out there, which we had multiple products together trying to stitch together disparate data sets and then try to apply some knowledge and understanding around them. We went and realized, one, we needed to develop a new platform. So not only did we need a technology shift, we needed a cultural shift. And that cultural shift was around moving to DevOps. And so from that, we realized that we couldn't do this once every 6 months, a twice a year refresh cycle, where we turn around and give everybody a batch of code and said, here you go dump this back onto your Dynatrace environment that you installed for Atmon, and you'll get, version 2.1, patch fix 37, whatever the vernacular happened to be at the time. So when we did this, we went to we stuck very closely, and still do to this day, to that 2-week sprint methodology or approach. And as such, what happens is our developers are, thousands of times a day are pushing code into our pipelines and having that go through all the various testings, whether that's user acceptance, performance, security hardening, et cetera. But from that, once every 2 weeks, like clockwork, we are actively updating globally every single one of our clusters around the world. So the continuous automation is everything from on the end side, allowing us to turn around and tie us seamlessly into these customer environments, like you kind of when you were pre-feeding that question. It is about that, but it's also about turning around and continuously updating and automating the rollout of our platform so that the end users don't have to do anything. That these they just get the additional benefits, the speed, the newer, better, faster, higher quality software automatically without having to lift a finger. We do it every 2 weeks. It's actually 25 releases a year, so we give off the end of year holiday season, depending where you are. We'll just say it's Festivus, and that way we've covered everybody. And what we're finding is that where it helped us transform one of the most significant transformations is that prior to that, under that old waterfall approach with the old Atmon solution, roughly 90% of our bugs were reported by customers in production. We only were able to self-catch the production ones about 10% of the time before it impacted users. Now we're down to less than 7% of our bugs that are discovered are reported by end users. We're catching 93% of them before they ever hit, and within 2 weeks have already got fixes out there and rolled out to alleviate that issue.
So does the customer accept these updates every 2 weeks, or do they just automatically updates?
So we do, obviously, because there are customers out there that are absolutely opposed to running a 0-day code, or they want to run a n-1, n-x state. So they do have that right to do that, and they have no problem doing it. What's interesting, though, of the 6,000 customers out there across, I forget how many thousands of clusters around the globe we have, both SaaS and on-premises clusters. The latest stat I saw last quarter was 91% of all the Dynatrace clusters around the globe are actually running the latest and greatest, which means our customers have confidence in our ability to do this and are allowing us to do it.
That's awesome. That's higher than Apple has a pretty substantial stat of 70% running latest version of iOS, and that's pretty high. That's way outside of most vendors. So good. Hey. All right, so I think we're coming up on our time here. Anything else you wanted to bring up? Any closing thoughts or things that you think that the audience might want to know?
No, really, the questions you asked helped flesh out all the talking points I wanted to bring up today for your audience. Hopefully they found that a very valuable and useful use of their time. And if anybody does have questions, I'd love to work back through you and talk about it with them. Good.
All right, so if you want to learn more about Dynatrace, you can go to www.dynatrace.com. Pretty easy domain name. And with that, we'll bring this session to an end. Russell, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I had a great conversation today. Enjoyed it, and looking forward to season 2.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Take care. I'm Sean McDermott, your host of the AIOps Evolution Podcast, season 2. Take care.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation about AIOps and the future of IT operations. Interested in a deeper dive on these topics? Check out our resources available at AIOpsevolution.com. And remember to subscribe to get the latest